And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Here we are, population growth. All right, let's dig into this. We've spoken about ecosystems, the biogeochemical cycles, the need for balance. Now we're going to turn our attention to the organisms and how they balance themselves in the ecosystem through the form of population growth. Population growth is the increase of the number of individuals in a population, generally speaking. I mean, it could also decrease, but that's generally called population decline, but details. What does that really mean, though? Right? If we break this down, okay? Population is a group of organisms that belong to the same species, living in a particular area at a particular time. So a family of bears in a forest or students in a particular classroom. A community, on the other hand, is a collection of all populations in a particular area. So the family of bears and the mosquitoes and the trees. So you can see here in this picture, right, a single organism is just one deer. A population is all the deer. A community is the deer, the zebra, the oxen, the vultures, the lions, the trees. And the ecosystem is everything, the animals, the plants, the sunlight, the water, the minerals, everything. Okay? Okay. So now that we know what a population is, and we know population growth is about the increase in the number, where does this go to? Populations in open ecosystems, meaning ones where the animals can move around freely, are influenced by four factors which can be shown with this mathematical formula. Population growth is equal to two positives, natally, immigration, and two negatives, mortality and emigration. Now, to gain in population, the births and the immigration have to be higher than the mortalities, the deaths, and the emigration. Now, immigration means you come into an area, emigration means you leave an area, right? So if you emigrate from one country, you immigrate to another one. In versus M, which is out, basically. So what we're saying is that there are basically two ways for the population to change. It can go up or it can go down. If it's going up, that means that either more people are moving in or more babies are being born. If it's going down, that means either more people are dying or people are leaving. Okay, pretty straightforward. It's not really even an equation. It's just tallying, right? Count. Oh, there are 10 deer here this year. Oh, next year there's 12 deer. They went up to. As far as an equation goes, pretty easy, especially compared to physics, right? A big part of this formula is the birth rate, which is tied strongly to something called the biotic potential. So the biotic potential is the maximum number of children that a species could produce if resources were unlimited. Okay, let's take a look at that. Because we've just talked about, death and things, we're going to throw something a little cute up there. Biotic potential is regulated by four factors. The birth potential, the capacity for survival, procreation, and the length of the reproductive life. These four factors, you can see their definitions. We're going to go through them in detail, though. Population growth. Let's take a look at some really unexpected numbers. Okay, so birth potential, lifespan, we got a bunch of different pieces of information here. Let's break it down. Okay, so first things first, birth potential is the maximum number of children per birth. Okay, so if we take a look back over here, fish, birth potential 1,000. So for one attempt at having kids, a fish could have 1,000 kids. Seems like a lot. They lay eggs, right? They're not mammals. They don't carry them internally, like, for example, cats, dogs, cows, whatever. Elephants, dogs, and cats, of course, they're mammals. They tend to carry them internally. So you see here, the elephants are basically just one. These ones can be in litters of 5, 4, something like that. I looked up averages. So that's birth potential. Capacity for survival, the number of children that reach the reproductive age. So how many of the kids actually survive? Well, take a look here. Fish, 2%. Compare that to the elephants of 70% and cats and dogs, which are in the 90s. So these guys don't have nearly as many kids as the fish do, but they survive a lot better, right? You're not getting many fish making it to being reproductive age. Now that's because some of them are eaten when they're young, some of them are eaten when they're older, some of them die for other reasons. Basically, the fish are using a different procreation strategy. There's like strategy 1, strategy 2. Strategy 1, lots of kids, hope that some of them survive, don't really care. They don't really take care of their kids. Heck, a lot of fish die right after having kids in the first place. Option two is where you have a few kids, but you take care of them and you try to make sure they survive. Okay. So what else we got here? Procreation, the number of times the species reproduces each year. Okay, okay. So how many? So procreation, 1 day. What? How can they lay eggs? So it doesn't take them very long. They don't have to hold the child internally or anything like that. So they just lay the egg and then they're done. But there's another thing here that'll make that a little bit more obvious. You can see here, right? The elephant is 22 months, and then the dog and the cat are about the same at 2 1/3 of a month. But the important part is the length of the reproductive life. Elephants can have kids for 30 years. Dogs and cats for 11 and 16. Fish for 1 day. What? I said this at the beginning. A lot of fish die right after they have kids, so they get one shot. Hence the huge number of attempts, right? So this fish here lives for 7 years. Once it reaches that 7 year of age, it is ready to go and have kids. It will release 1,000 eggs. 2% of them will survive, and then immediately dies. Now, not every fish does this, to be fair, but some do. Salmon, for example, which I believe is what I looked up when I looked up fish. The elephant, on the other hand, lives for 80 years. They'll have one kid. It's got a decent chance of survival. It takes a while. It's like almost 2 years of being pregnant, but they can do it again for 30 years. Cats and dogs, they don't live as long. They live only 20 years. They have litters, pretty decent chance of survival. This is probably involving dealing with like pets, cats and dogs. I'm sure like a tiger or something's gonna have a slightly different number there. It doesn't take them very long to be pregnant, and they can do it for a decent amount of time compared to their total lifespan. So this is one of the reasons why they, for example, say that you should spay or neuter your pets, because you can have a lot of litters if you're not careful. Now, this sort of shows, right, that in these cases, some of these organisms are going to be better at populating an environment than others, right? Like the cats and the dogs are pretty much in like, you could say a sweet spot in terms of how quickly they can repopulate. The fish, I mean, they're batting 1,000 there, well, literally 1,000, but not many of them are going to make it. Whereas the cats and the dogs, they are going to have a pretty decent sized litter and they can do it fairly quickly. The elephant is slow and it takes a long time. That's a problem. Heck, elephants, because pregnancy takes a long time, in the first year of pregnancy, the mother elephant can actually shut down the pregnancy and put the calf into like hibernation almost, so it doesn't keep growing if climate conditions are too bad, if there isn't enough food or water or whatever. Only in the first year though. But that's because it takes so long for them to make another baby elephant. Pretty big advantage. But let's take a look at some other numbers. Humans. Uh-oh. Lifespan about 100 years. I'm being generous. Not all of us will go that far. Birth potentials usually one. You can get twins, you can get triplets, but usually it's one. Capacity for survival. We'll get back to that. Procreation takes about 9 months, and reproductive life cycle is about 40 years, give or take. But you'll notice I have 3 different entries for humans here. Before 1900, in 1950, and in 2017. Those are the numbers I could find. Before 1900, the capacity for survival was just over half. Yep. In the 1950s, it was almost 3/4, and nowadays it's almost 100%. We've almost caught up to cats and dogs. It just took us another 100 years. Ugh. Ugh. What's going on here? That's right. Humans have generally had a terrible capacity for survival, which is one factor in encouraging people to have many children. If you have 4 kids, you have a decent chance of at least 2 surviving to being adults. In the old days, people used to have big families for a range of reasons, one of them being it was hard to ensure that they would survive. There's an old saying, an heir and a spare, for a reason. You needed someone to take over, and someone just in case that first guy didn't make it. As a result of this, people had a lot of kids. There were also extra hands on the farm and such. When you were busy working, a kid can actually help. My dad, when he was younger, he was 4 years old. He would do chores on the farm in order to help pick up firewood, take care of the animals, stuff like that. because farm work, well, is very important, but there are certain tasks on a farm that you can tell a little kid, you're going to do this. Not so much in a factory. So, what changed? Well, let's take a look at what resulted in that low capacity for survival. This is what do children die from? What has changed since 1990? Okay, so this isn't even that long ago. Now, what you see here, this square is all the total number of children who have passed. And you'll see that there are two squares in each area. So this big square here, the smaller, darker square, is the more modern number of 2017. The bigger, lighter square behind it is the older number of 1990. So they've broken it into four basic categories. Up here, you've got your birth defects, or something that's gone wrong with the birth itself. And that claimed originally about 3 million babies, and now is only about 2.7 million only. These are things like the kid being born too soon, something going wrong during the birth itself, other kinds of disorders or something, newborn blood disorders are up here, a very small one. But this is the problem with birth itself, because it turns out that being born is really hard, not just on the kid, but also on mom. You can ask your mom about this. She'll have some opinions to share, most likely. The capacity for survival for humans was so low because, well, due to our evolution, we're upright and we're kind of stay in the womb for a long time. We're kind of big. It's hard for us to get out, and it's easy for something to go wrong during that process. Heck, in the old days, the Romans, for example, they used to give awards, honors to mothers who had had, I think it was 8 children. You survived 8 childbirths, providing more sons and daughters for Rome. Congratulations, we will honor you. That tells you something right there. First of all, that's a lot of kids. Second of all, getting to 8 was hard. Over here, you're going to have non-communicable diseases in sort of this area down here. So this birth defects is genetic disorders. The yellow box here, that's nutritional disorders. So you don't get enough food. This whole green area is accidents, drowning, falling, stuff like that, because kids, they get into things. Up here, you got your non-communicable diseases, so that'll only affect that one person. Down here, you get communicable diseases. This is a bunch of them. These are the two big ones. We're doing those last. So down here, you got stuff like here's measles, here's meningitis, you got some tetanus, some malaria, tropical disease. That's a big problem. Whooping cough, all of these, big, big trouble, and they spread really easily. So it says here measles in 2017, the number of deaths was 83,000. And in 1990, it was 613,000. It's a good thing we got measles on the run. All those vaccines are super working. Tuberculosis is right here. That would have been a much bigger number in the old days, but we've managed to keep tuberculosis down too. These are the two big ones, though. Pneumonia, which is an infection of the lungs, and a diarrhea. This one makes it so you can't breathe. Obviously, that's a problem. This one makes it so that way you poop too much, or as the more logical way to say it, to evacuate your bowels. Now, as a result of that, you can't get enough nutrients. You lose water. It basically drains you. It's very dangerous. This is the main way that cholera, for example, would have killed people, which was a big killer for humans for a long time until we figured out how diseases work. Either way, just the infectious diseases alone, this is a telling story. In 1990, it was 6.5 million kids dying of infectious diseases. Now it's 2.5. Well, as of 2017. Maybe it's better now, or maybe it's worse. But that should tell you a lot. Remember, if we look back here, we're at 95% by 2017. 1950, we were already at 73%. 1990 is between these two. So it's already going to be a very high percentage. In point of fact here, we've got a graph. This is what it looks like. All right, so the blue area is the kids who survived, and the red is the kids who perished. Down here, we see 1800s. Over here, we see our 2017 when I found all these data. And you can see how it steadily declines, right? So 1990 is going to be somewhere around here-ish. The difference from here, right, read across the graph down, that's not a big difference. Not compared to over here. Over here, we almost had half the kids not surviving. It's pretty crazy. I know. I know. That's pretty depressing. So let's see those cute animals again. Aww. Aww. And they're adorable. Okay. On the plus side, you survived. Unless you're a ghost. If we were to graph this population growth that we're seeing, we would discover a very unique shape. Doesn't matter if it's human population or any other animal. At the beginning, the growth would be what we call exponential. But as the ecosystem begins to fill up, the population would start to level off, reaching a dynamic equilibrium. Dynamic meaning that it changes, and equilibrium meaning that it's kind of steady or balanced in some way. The strange S-shaped graph is called a logistic curve. So this is what you will get. At the beginning, it'll just be exponential, but then it starts to level off. This is pure exponential. But what we see is that eventually it starts to level off. Now, why does it level off? Well, let's take a look at what's going on here. Why do we care about this? Well, here's the current estimate for human population, and it probably looks pretty familiar. Now, this is an estimate, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the future. You can see here, though, that in the 1800s, we had our first billion humans. It took us until then. We were doing it for thousands of years, millions of years. And we got a billion humans in 1800. Our second billion was in 1927. It took quite a bit. Our third billion was 1960. That did not take nearly as long. 4 billion was 1974. Whoa. What happened? Well, a couple things. We've talked about some of these, but let's take another look here. We just talked about all of the different ways in which children can pass away, and a big part of that, of course, was diseases and things. Modern medicine really kicked into gear kind of after World War I into World War II, which was after about 1925 to about 1945, we'll say, in that area. Take a look when the curve started to pick up speed. Right around here, we invented better medicine. Oh, capacity for survival went up. But there's other aspects as well. I mentioned we were talking about the nitrogen cycle, that Haber managed to figure out his Haber process to make fertilizer, artificial fertilizer, during the First World War. Well, that's also just a little bit before here. So not only do we have better medicine, we also have better food all at the same time. You'll notice that that square, a couple depressing slides back over here, this square for nutritional disorders is pretty small, all things considered. It wasn't that small before. Okay, here, got the cute animals again. Oh, okay. Now, what do we see here? That means we've got a twofer going on all at the same time. You've got more food available to more people more easily, thanks to things like artificial fertilizer, and you got better medicine to help make sure people survive. What happens as a result? Huge increase in population. What's the other thing that we can see here? Well, we also didn't have a lot of war. I mean, there were still some wars, but there weren't nearly as many, right? After the 40s, which would be about here or so, right? About here. After the 40s, we didn't have any global wars anymore. So we're also not, killing people off that way. By 2012, we hit 7 billion people. It's saying here by 2024, we're going to hit 8 billion. So this was done, I think, originally in 2013, if I remember when I found this particular graph. We're obviously sitting at 7.8 billion people right now. So we're on track for getting it by 2024. We might even get it a little sooner. Now, this is assuming that we're going to hit 9 billion people by 2048. It's kind of assuming we're going to start plateauing into that logistic curve. We don't really know. I mean, this is a guess. We don't know. Does this mean we're running out of food or something? Well, to be honest, that's been a concern for people for a long time. The idea that we're running out of food and there are too many people was originally proposed back in the 1800s when they had their first billion people. And they're like, well, there's no way that we're ever going to be able to feed this many people. We have too many people, is what they said when they had just hit 1 billion. If we showed them the world today, they'd be like, impossible. Why? Well, we're going to have to understand that, and that's going to involve us looking into something called the carrying capacity. But we're going to save that for next time. I know, cliffhanger. I'll see you guys then.